Nice to meet you. Thank you very much for accepting my interview request.
It's a pleasure.
And it's my pleasure and honor to meet you here today at the Prince Claus Conservatorium. Well, since you are 17 years old, you are completely professional connected within the international jazz scene. And you are born in Philadelphia, 12 October 59. So very soon you will have another birthday.
60th birthday coming up next week.
Yeah, and I want to know how the trumpet and this infinite love towards music started to become so serious in your life.
Well, where I grew up, there wasn't a lot going on. So I was very fortunate that in those days people still were expected to pick up an instrument when they reached the age of 8. It was kind of presented to you in public school that you could start playing an instrument if you chose to. So I was interested in playing the guitar, and my parents didn't want me to play the guitar because it was the 60s and they thought maybe I'd turn into a hippie. So that wasn't happening. And then I wanted to play the clarinet because I had a friend who played the clarinet, but they thought it would make my teeth stick out. So I couldn't play the clarinet. And then I wanted to play the trombone, and they said, no, your arms are too short. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll play the trumpet. And I think what this was the truth is this was probably the least expensive instrument at the time. So, they said, okay, you can play the trumpet. So I got a trumpet, and the very first day I picked it up, I could play. I could get a sound out of the instrument right away. And it's funny because when I was very small, when I was an infant, my grandfather gave me the nickname Satchmo, which is, that was my nickname when I was a baby. It was Satchmo, so there you go. I think it was destiny. But I didn't really take to music lessons when I was young because I didn't like the counting. And I also didn't like the music that we were playing, and the trumpet lessons was dumb and I didn't like it. So I gave up lessons. I didn't take lessons. I played in the school band though, and I loved playing in the school band, but I didn't love lessons. So I really learned how to play the trumpet by listening to the radio. Unfortunately for me, in the Philadelphia area, we had a university called Temple University that had a jazz radio station. And I used to just search the radio trying to find anything that had trumpet in it. And the thing that I found was jazz. I didn't even know it was called jazz. I just knew it was music that had a trumpet in it. And I would sometimes tape things on a reel-to-reel tape recorder that I heard on the radio. And I would practice along. I would play along with the things that I heard on the radio. And if I heard a name of when they would announce the names, I would, if I heard, a name like Thad Jones, or if I heard Freddie Hubbard, or Miles Davis, or Maynard Ferguson, I would go to the record store and I would try to find an album with that name. And then once I had an album, then I would play along with the album. That's how I learned how to play the trumpet, was playing along with records. Later, of course, I did learn how to read music. Came in mighty handy. But my first experience playing the trumpet was playing along with records, playing along with, vinyl records.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so you had some mentors in the early stage when you became a professional musician. I think at least you had Art Blakey because you studied in his school, in his university, as part of the Art Blakey's jazz method.
I subbed in the Jazz Messengers. At the time when I was that age and I had already moved to New York, I had spent some time in Chicago before that, but when I moved to New York, pretty soon after getting to New York, when I was doing graduate school, I auditioned for Blue Note Records, and I got a place in a band called Out of the Blue. We were a young artist band that was signed by Blue Note. We did 4 albums for them. It was Kenny Garrett and Ralph Peterson Jr. and Ralph Bowen and Bob Hurst was our bass player and Harry Pickens was our pianist. Later we had Renee Rosnes and Steve Wilson and a lot of great musicians that came through that band. So, when I first got to New York, every chance I got, whenever Art Blakey was in town, I would go and bring my trumpet. And Art had a wonderful tradition of letting young musicians to sit in with the band. If you stayed, until like the third set, sometimes at the end of the third set, he'd look around and say, he'd have someone come on. And I used to do that a lot. So, if Terrence Blanchard got stuck on the road somewhere and couldn't make it back, or if Wallace Roney couldn't make it, they would call me to sub and fill in on trumpet, which was, of course, a thrill. Being part of that tradition, the Messengers was great. But at that time I had my own band, Out of the Blue. And then later, of course, I joined Horace Silver's Quintet. So, you know, in the hard bop world, that was my experience in New York, was playing with those, you know, playing that music, which was kind of the center of the jazz universe at that time for young musicians, was playing with what I would call a mentor band, where you would kind of really learn how to play. After you'd gone to school and you'd studied how to play your instrument. If you were lucky enough to get into one of those bands and spend some time with the older musicians who really formed that music, it was, you know, you learned a lot about performing, playing with those guys.
Yeah. Can you tell me what you especially learned from Art Blakey? What did he give to you, just for you?
Well, the thing that every trumpet player learned from Art Blakey was have your chops, because you know Art would you know, put the fire on you, and if your chops if you started losing your strength, you know, you knew that he would flip the sticks over and play with the fat end and really start bashing it, and if your chops went down, the next song he was going to call was going to be a ballad featuring you. so Art's thing was you know, was challenge for a trumpet player, was just strength, you know, being strong. And it's a different kind of strength from playing lead trumpet. You know, I've been a lead trumpet player playing with big bands my whole life. You know, I played lead trumpet with Toshiko Akiyoshi. I played lead trumpet with Machito. I played lead trumpet with Chico. So I'm a strong trumpet player. But there's a difference between the kind of strength that you have when you're playing lead trumpet in a big band and when you're playing solos all night in a small group. Very different kind of chops. So, you know, you can think that you're strong, but if you have to play like multiple choruses, you know, with a real burn-in rhythm section, you find out really quick whether you have stamina or not to be able to play, you know, chorus after chorus. If you listen to Freddie Hubbard playing, you know, 10 choruses on a Ugetso or something like that, that's another type of strength. And art really challenged you to have that kind of strength.
Yeah. Well, you have a big love for big ensembles, for big bands. You have a huge interest in Latin music. You are a hard bop player. You're an arranger and a conductor. And you also are an educator. This is why we met here. Can you just tell me what hard bop is, and what is the fascination for you to be a hard bop trumpet player?
Well, you know, interestingly, hard bop is the music that really followed the cool school. So when you think about modern jazz, pretty much beginning with, that's not really true, but you know, we think about bebop as being the beginning of what we call modern jazz. Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker. Although there was a lot of modern music going on before that, but you know, when we think about the modern jazz language, a lot of that is bebop. But bebop is kind of inaccessible for a young musician. When young players first learning to play, tempos are fast, the melodies are complicated. It's hard to hear. Hard bop during the hard bop era, the music kind of returned to more of a blues-based kind of vocabulary. And you know, tempos were often not quite as fast, and the tunes were kind of more accessible, I would say. So easier to hear. So for someone who's learning to play, for me, I learned playing hard bop. That's the music that I listen to. Bebop actually came later for me, because it's, you know, you need more technique. And you also need to just, you know, the harmonic rhythm of the songs is often, you know, da 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 da. So it's very fast harmonic rhythm. It's harder to do, but if you have songs that have you like more of a groove orient, you know, so a lot of Horace Silver songs, you know, and a lot of Art Blakey songs, they're kind of a bit more groove oriented, and the harmonic harmonic rhythm is a little more stretched out. So that music is more accessible. So it's a great place to start. I often start a lot of my students who are learning how to play, having them play, you know, Horace Silver songs. It's just tuneful songs, good solid chord progressions that are not too difficult to play, at least most of them. And I also have to say that even with Latin music, originally what we call Afro-Cuban jazz started out as a marriage between Cuban music and bebop specifically. But when I started as an arranger, a lot of what I was doing as an arranger was mixing hard bop with Afro-Cuban music. So that's what these guys wanted me to do. It was a different kind of different. It was like a little more modern approach than what the bebop language provides you. I mean, we use bebop language and hard bop. We use all the languages together, even avant-garde jazz, which I had a lot of experience playing with guys like Roscoe Mitchell and playing with Anthony Braxton. Even a lot of those approaches to music was also, it's all mixed together now. Where these things were very separate at the time. Now they're all mixed together. Even cool music, which is something that people kind of forgot about. The whole cool school, that it was happening pretty much in the 50s, primarily. Even you find a lot of that harmonic language. I guess if you think about that, that's kind of in the context of Gil Evans. A lot of the people that came out of that school, whose music seems to still resonate, are people like Gil Evans, and Miles Davis, of course, was associated with the cool school. So even that language is still finds its way into what we use.
Yeah, well, very fascinating for me was to see that you also played with Anthony Braxton, with Roscoe Mitchell, and with Leo Smith, and you were, of course, involved in big ensembles and big orchestras. How did you get inside there, and what did you learn from them?
Well, when I was in college, I went to Oberlin Conservatory, a good classical school, which, I studied jazz there. I studied classical composition there. I also studied sociology and anthropology, but, I graduated with a couple degrees from Oberlin. But I was learning how to play the trumpet, so I was playing in symphony orchestra, and I was also studying with a great teacher named Wendell Logan, who built the jazz program at Oberlin Conservatory. And Anthony Braxton came through to do a workshop, and he heard me play, and he was putting together a big band to tour Europe, and I guess he needed some, he needed some young, inexpensive players. That's pretty much it. He wanted to put a big band together, and he knew if he got some students from Oberlin that we weren't going to cost a lot of bread. I'm not going to say that I was chosen for that band because I was the end-all, be-all, greatest jazz trumpet player, but there were some great players in that band. Kenny Wheeler was in that band. George Lewis, the trombone player, was in that band. There were some marvelous players. But we were there because we could play this really difficult music that he'd written. I mean, I could play his crazy lines that he had written. They were very difficult. He knew that he could get musicians that could play the music, and that weren't going to cost him a whole lot of bread. And for us, of course, it was an opportunity to tour Europe as a professional with this music. So that's the main reason why I got in there. But once I was there, then of course I met other players like Roscoe Mitchell and Leo, and just from being on the scene, when they had a project to do the following year, I wound up going back to Europe with Roscoe Mitchell with his big band, and then of course I wound up playing with Roscoe in this band called the Sound Ensemble, and I learned a lot of things about music playing with those guys, because they didn't use the same structure as the bebop and hard bop guys. They didn't rely on those kinds of structures, which means that you kind of have to have another way of making music other than just chord changes and licks that we learn. You had to try to draw upon what was happening in the moment, which sometimes was great and sometimes was not great. It was very, when you don't have these set structural elements to rely on, and you just have to make it in the moment, it means, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. Well, that's just true of any kind of music, but especially in avant-garde music, I heard some really amazing playing, and I heard some real disasters as well. Learned a lot. It's funny, that music kind of petered out. That music really resonated during the time of communism in Eastern Europe. I think that a lot of the places where that music was most popular were Eastern European countries, because there was something expressionistic about that music. You'd hear guys like play, very, and that raw emotion that you heard in the playing seemed to resonate with people who are repressing those emotions. When we would play in Poland, or we'd play in what was called Yugoslavia at the time, people just went crazy for that music. Eastern Europe in general, people went nuts. And then, of course, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when things opened up, people didn't. That kind of angst. Maybe it'll just come back now. I don't know, but it's something about the angst that people had, that repression of their freedoms, when they heard us playing like crazy, free like that, it just seemed to just touch something in them. It was a music for a moment. It's hard to sustain that after you don't hear as much of that real avant-garde, pure avant-garde as you did then. But a lot of those techniques are still now kind of folded into the music. So it doesn't disappear, it just is now integrated into other things. Yeah.
Okay, well, you also have this big fascination for orchestras. You played in many orchestras and many big bands already. And you are also conducting now, or since several years, big bands, especially also in Germany. You play with the HR Big Band, with the SWR Big Band, and the NDR Big Band, I think. And you had very interesting projects, especially with the SWR Big Band.
VDR
Yes.
Cologne,
Yeah. So, first of all, I want to know how you organize a big band yourself, because you also arrange music so that it fits more into something that you want to give to your expression to work with a big band, with this big body of a band. Can you please tell me a little bit more about the way how you work with big ensembles?
So big ensembles present you with lots of possibilities, and you have to think about which possibility you're going to choose. Because just because you're working with a big band, or even a symphony orchestra, what you're trying to accomplish with the arrangement is different. Sometimes you're presenting an artist who already has music. Some artists, like I've done a project with Richard Bona, for instance. So he has music and he already has a structure to it. And when he comes in to do a project with a big band, he's not spending weeks and weeks rehearsing that. You kind of have to mold the arrangement of the music around what an artist already does. It's the same with Michel Camilo. When I work with Michel Camilo and arrange some of his music, he pretty much has a way of playing, and you creating, you're orchestrating the music and maybe adding some things for the band outside of what the artist already does, but taking into account not only the song that the artist is playing, but the way they play it. So, and you're not going to really change that much because they don't have the time to learn a whole new approach. So that's so you're kind of wrapping what an artist does with a very colorful and powerful addition to it. So that's one approach. Another approach is taking music and deconstructing it. I had a lot of experience doing that with the Carnegie Hall Jazz Band. For 10 years we had a band at Carnegie Hall. It was led by John Faddis. And what we would do is we would take standard songs and we would take them apart and put them together in novel ways, representing the music with new possibilities, new harmonies and new approaches, new grooves. And in that sense, you're treating the big band like an orchestra, and you're creating an orchestral development. When you think about orchestral music, it's not like you play a song and then a bunch of people play solos and then you take the song out and that's it. That works okay with a small group. When you have a big band, it's pretty disappointing if that's your approach. So what you're responsible for doing is presenting this music with a compelling mood, a compelling groove, something leaving some sort of fresh impression of what the music means. And then featuring solos, of course, because that's a big part of what we do, leaving space for the creative expression, but also using the orchestra for orchestral development, taking ideas, taking motives from the music, taking harmonic ideas and developing those things so that the ensemble tells a story, that there's some larger picture there. That's a different approach, and one approach that I also like very much. And so you have to assess what the idea is. In some cases you're also you have an artist and you just want to try to present them in some way that's very colorful. Maybe you want to just have them swing real hard. You just have a song that just kicks butt, and that's fun too. So I think the challenge with writing for large ensembles is the first most important challenge is what are we trying to do? Like what constitutes a successful program? What is the idea here? If we have an artist who's in the middle of a 52-week tour and they got 3 days to rehearse your music, you're not going to break any new ground there. Because it's, if you try to do that, you're going to have music that's under-rehearsed, and it's not going to be successful. Even though you might be very creative, if it doesn't work on the stage in the time that you have, that's just not a good plan. On the other hand, if you have a lot of time and you really have an opportunity to do something special and you just do something very simple, then that's going to be disappointing because you had the chance to do something really wonderful and new and something that challenges people, challenges your audience and challenges the musicians, which of course we love. Then that's what you're trying to do. And when you're working with one of these great bands, one of these bands that works together all the time, you have the opportunity to do that. And if you don't take advantage of that opportunity, then everyone's disappointed. So you want to, you have your moments where you just want to do a good job and make a good concert for the people and have everybody come home satisfied and happy. And there's the other times when you're trying to really create something new. You're trying to stretch out there and see what's possible. And you have to know when is which. Which one are you doing?
How do you know that?
Well, a lot of it actually has to do with time budget. It has to do with the time that you have to prepare. Even with the Carnegie Hall Jazz Band, where we had usually 3 solid days of rehearsal, if different arrangers brought in really difficult music, 3 days is not always a lot of time to really put something together. So you find, you have to know what else is being rehearsed, and what's possible. I did an arrangement of some music for John Faddis for the Philadelphia Orchestra. And I knew that, that's a great opportunity to write for a great orchestra like that, but I also knew that that orchestra was going to have about half an hour to rehearse my chart. So as much as I wanted to do some really interesting stuff, and I think, managed to do that, there's only so far you're going to be able to go and get a good performance of your music in the time allotted. So when you're an arranger or a producer, you have to really take into account very practical limitations on what you're able to do. You have to know who you're writing for. You have to know the circumstances in which the music is going to get played. You have to know the circumstances of which it's going to be rehearsed. You have to know the circumstances of the artists who are going to play, whether they're going to be there the whole time or whether they're only going to show up at the last minute and just perform. It's very different, and the success of a project often depends on your understanding of all those practical details. Aside from all the musical details, you have to think very practically. Otherwise, you can have a great music that you wrote that never gets played correctly, and then that's a disaster, And then everybody's stressed out and nobody's happy, and then you're like, why did you do that? It makes no sense,
Yeah. Yeah. But you are also a conductor. How do you understand that job, to do that, to form or to give hints to a big ensemble? What is your role and what requirements do you bring to do that job?
It depends on who you're conducting. If you're conducting a symphony orchestra, then your job is to conduct like a symphony orchestra conductor. Show everybody their cue, give a kind of personal embodiment of what the music is supposed to sound like. You give a kind of a visual representation of what the music is supposed to be. Also, it's like when you cue people, you give them the cue in character of what you want them to sound like. Whether you want them to sound something swinging, you make yourself swinging and you bring them in. If you want someone to nail something, you just look at them and bang. If you're trying to get the music is to dance, then you might want to dance a little bit. If you can dance, you might have a little motion and. So what you're doing is you're trying to elicit the kind of performance out of the musicians that they're capable of, and you're there to support them. You're not there to study your score. You're not you're engaged with the band. And to some extent you're engaged with the audience too. Sometimes I'll make little motions that are you think about Dizzy Gillespie conducting his big band, for instance. His mannerisms in front of the band were very much part of the show, and they had a lot of fun. I got a chance. I played in Dizzy Gillespie's band, when I was pretty young, and just watching him in front of the band, he was part of the show. He was a character, a wonderful character, and a lot of people came not only for the music but because they wanted to see that character. So, to some extent, that's part of it too. All symphony orchestra conductors, by the way, are part of the show. A lot of times most of the time, the orchestra doesn't need a conductor. Especially if they're playing a Beethoven symphony, you have a concert master, they can run the show. So the conductor's a lot of part of the show. That's not diminishing the role of a good conductor, great conductor, but the visual part of it is an important part. In a studio, of course, a lot of times the role of the conductor is just to make sure that everybody knows where to go when, so that you don't screw up the take. You're really just making sure that everybody's in the right place at the right time. Other times, as a conductor, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create an environment where people perform the best. So I'll give you an example. I played with the Count Basie band with Thad Jones conducting the band. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because Thad, in front of a band, he was always able to get the best performances out of people. He's just, some musicians, they're able to do that. They just, somehow or other, their presence makes everybody play better. And Thad was definitely one of those people that you just brought the music out of you. There was something encouraging about the way he was in front of the band. And you can't say that it was necessarily about cueing and stuff like that. It's just his physical and just energetic presence. Another player who's like that is Jimmy Heath, who I've played a lot with. Jimmy Heath in front of a band is just magnificent to watch. There's nobody having more fun in the room than Jimmy Heath. He just, he is a living physical embodiment of his music. When you see him playing, he's smiling and he's moving around and he's just having such fun. It's contagious. Everyone else in the room just feels the same way. Gerald Wilson was like that too, another conductor, another big band conductor who just seemed to just bring, swing to the music. It just was marvelous. And there are other conductors like Tito Puente, for instance, who are just kind of personalities, personalities in front of the band. So you have all these different approaches, and it really is different, very different depending on what kind of role. If you're in the studio and you're, if I'm conducting a movie score, and I just need people to just make it happen with a very short amount of time, then sometimes you're a manager. You're just getting people to, sometimes what you're doing is you're correcting mistakes. In rehearsal, you're finding things that aren't working. You're listening to find out whether somebody's not playing correctly, or in some cases, if there's a problem in the music that needs to be repaired. So if you're the conductor and that you're conducting a score and there's something wrong, you're the one who's got to fix it. Something's not happening. You're like the doctor. You're listening and you're saying, "Uh-oh, something's wrong over there. What are you playing?" And then you have to figure out what the solution is.
Yeah.
So all these different things go into being a conductor.
I think more you are becoming a big father of a big family, right? Not like a doctor. I mean, you have all these family members there, you help them. Of course, they have to look at you, but how do they do that? I mean, they play the instrument, they have to read the notes, then they also have to look at you. Is this always working like that?
Well, that's why everybody's oriented this way, so they can see their music, and they can, through the corner of their eye, they can also see you. And in some cases, they're counting, and then they're looking for you to give them the confidence to come in, and how they're supposed to come in. So it's, you always have some contact with the conductor, And sometimes, if people are overdubbing and they're in a booth somewhere, they're not looking at you. They're only interacting with you when there's a problem. So it's different. But most of the time, they can see you, even if they're not looking directly at you. The ideal, of course, is when musicians don't have to stare at the music. Like if you're working with a rhythm section, most of the time they don't have to look at the music. They kind of know what the music is, and they can look at each other. Sometimes you don't really want them looking at you at all. Most of the time when a drummer is playing, I don't want the drummer looking at me. I want the drummer and the bass player looking at each other. I want them connecting so that they create the groove that's essential. They only looking at me when it's essential. If there's a cue or something's changing, or then they look at me at need, not all the time.
Yeah. Well, you of course are very fascinated to do this work, to play with big ensembles and big bands and orchestras. What do you want to reach in music? To reach a goal? Do you have a goal to work further with big bands? What are you dreaming about?
Well, it's not always big bands. I mean, the thing about big bands is for, writing for large ensembles gives you the possibility of many different colors and textures. That's the great thing of working with large groups, is you have more possibilities. But those possibilities, the reason why we use big bands is because it's accessible. If we, most big band conductors, if they had the chance to work with a, symphony orchestra, they'd do that. that's an expensive proposition, and some people have managed it, and I certainly have managed it at times. But I think any musician, any composer, if they've been writing for a long time, they just more possibilities for colors and textures and more detailed expression. Let's say, the more, I mean, you can write a lot of very interesting, colorful music with just a trio. If you know how to write for those instruments, if you know how to get the possibilities out of the instruments, you can get a lot of colors out of a very small group of instruments. Even with just one piano, you can get a lot of different things out of that. But when you look at what a brass section can do, all the different sounds you can get from a brass section, all the different sounds you can get from a woodwind section, especially if they're playing woodwind doubles like flutes and clarinets, bass clarinets, there's so many different things you can do. And when you look at a symphony orchestra now, when you're talking about double reeds and conical brass and orchestral percussion, it's like you just have all the possibilities in the world, and it's very intoxicating when you present it with that. So that's one side of a composer's ambition. Another side of a musician's ambition is just to play. I mean, it's a kick to play with a symphony orchestra. It's like, it's like having a, deluxe, deluxe experience. But nothing. It doesn't take away from the experience of playing with a really good rhythm section and just playing music. That's mighty good too. So it's like, for instance, sometimes you want to go out and have to a 5-star restaurant and order the $1,000 bottle of wine and get the 7-course meal. That's great. But some days you don't want that. Some days you want to go and you want to have the best Cuban sandwich on the block, and that's what you want. So it's just because you have the possibility of having the grand experience doesn't mean that's what you want to have all the time. Sometimes you want to play in a jazz club with a really good rhythm section and really dig deep into some performance. That's one of the beautiful things about being a jazz musician, is that we now have access to all those experiences as performers.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to an album, or actually 2 albums we recorded in 2001 and 2008. In 2001 it was the Orchestra Suite. Mm-hmm. And in 2008 with the WDR Big Band, the Misa Afro Cubana. Yeah. And both albums do honor the orishas, mm-hmm.
which
are spirits or gods. Please tell me a little bit about that work and why you want to honor these spirits or gods.
Well, I have been blessed, cursed, I don't know, with 3 marriages. No regrets. I've had interesting relationships. My first wife was half Dominican, and she was interested in Santeria as a participant. In fact, when we got married, we went to Haiti, and we had a whole voodoo ceremony, which is not what everybody thinks is in the movies. It's not like that at all. There's voodoo dolls and all that kind of stuff. So, of course, voodoo and Santeria are pretty much the same thing in different languages. One's in French and the other's in Spanish. Not a whole lot more difference. But I was initiated to this, this basically what you could call African cosmology. So a lot of West African religions kind of translated into a West, North America, Caribbean experience. So I was kind of immersed in that world from a cultural standpoint. And when you marry someone, you want to try to get to know something about their culture, and that was culture. So I took an interest in it, and I started to find that each of these different orishas had a personality, and of course that makes for good music. When you're writing music about characters, it's great because that's what gives a rise to mood and different kind of grooves and different types of thematic material. So I had the opportunity to do 2 albums dealing with that. It's just the use of subject material. I mean, there's all kinds of things to write an album about. You can write an album about art. You can write an album about food. You can write an album about things in history. It's why one of the reasons why, by the way, I tell my students that if you're going to be a musician, you want to fill your head with more than music. You want to know something about history and culture and other arts and you know, other things that are going on in the world besides notes and chords and you know, there's more to know about the world than just that. And all those things that you learn, they all go into music if you have them. So that was an example of that. A cultural experience which I was sharing went into the music.
Yeah. Can you tell me how important silence is for you?
Well, that's interesting too, because you know, one of the things that bothers me, and you know, everyone has different likes about music, but one kind of music that bothers me is music where the entire sound continuum is saturated, where there's no space. You know, there's long chords and long notes and incessant grooves where every moment is filled with sound. I find that one of the really great things about music is the spaces. You know, boop bop, boop bop, boop bop, as compared to you know, when you have spaces between, you know, it allows the music to breathe. There have been a few bands that I've played with in my life that made the hair stand up on my arms. You know, well, one of them was our Blakey. You know, if you just started playing like Wayne Shorter tune one by one, and you hear gum 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 gum, just rhythm section playing, just a groove, you know. And now you feel like, oh man, I'm in it now. This is great. You know, or playing with the Machito orchestra, and they're just starting a, you know, and there's no horns or nothing going on. It's just a groove. That's, man, it's like, oh, wow, this feels so good. Or the bassy band, you know, getting ready to play, and it just, boom, you know, just bop, 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 ba, da, bop, bop. That clear out spot is just, it feels wonderful. And I've also spent, and this was wife number 2, spent amount of time working with dancers, you know, writing music for choreographies. And dancers respond very well to, you know, rhythmic, big picture kinds of things. And space is very important. If you have something bop, bop, that's, you know, dancers just eat that up. And it's just, you know, because it just marks. Whereas if you have constant motion all the time, I mean, you know, there's places where that works. But just the whole thing about you know, energy, you know, having high points and low points. You know, if everything is saturated all the time, then what happens is you actually wind up flatlining. Whereas if you have a space, you can go from here to here very quickly, and that's interesting. You know, just changes in energy level. Yeah, but sometimes it just goes on and on and on and on with too much saturation of the sound spectrum. Like when a guy sits in front of a camera and doesn't stop talking. It could be like that too.
Yeah. But do you also have silence in your life? I mean, you're working very lot, you are teaching a lot, you are busy all the time, I think. But do you also have islands of silence where you are just there without anything, with any input or output, just you? Do you have that?
So there's wife number 3. Because what we do every morning, you know, we get up, and I get up and make the coffee, and we sit out on the deck above the, you know, we live on top of a river, and we sit out there on the deck with our coffee, and we look out at this beautiful place and see the water birds, you know, looking for fish, and we have a dog named Bubba who sits there with us, and we just sit there with our coffee and look out into the water, you know, and just look at the sky and the water and think about how lucky we are that we can do that, and it's good. After, you know, this past month, solid month of traveling and touring, and, you know, I'm really looking forward to being on that deck and looking at the water and not saying a word. It's and you know, it's funny because even silence isn't silence.
It is something.
There's always something going on. You know, there's always little sounds, bugs and little birds, and you know, all the things that are going on, and you don't notice them when you're busy doing stuff.
Yeah, even the pulsation of your body, of
Absolutely.
everything.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me what is the most beautiful for you to be in this life and to have this life that you have?
Honestly, I have to say the best part of it is interacting with people in different places. You know, especially children, and watching the excitement in their eyes when they're discovering things for the first time, the things that excited me. And that when I see kids, you know, a kid could be a Chinese kid, it could be a German kid, it could be a, you know, an African kid, it could be a South American kid. It's the same kid. It's the same kid, you know, in a different body. I'm convinced that we have the same children, they're everywhere, the same kid, but they just has a different face or a different, you know. When I see some kid and their eyes are like this and they're playing a trombone like that and they have that, it makes me want to cry sometimes, just to see how connected people are. In a world where everyone exploits differences to try to gain power, they try to set one group of people against another because it gives them some sort of power or control. When you're doing, you know, when you're playing music with people from very different places and you see how much they just seem to gravitate towards each other, they want to connect with one another. I mean, that's what music is, you know, even just keeping time together, synchronizing, you know, just people from totally different places can come together and they can agree on pitch and they can agree on time and they have common interests. To me, I see that as the real truth of what people are, when they're not being manipulated by the media or by individuals who want to capitalize on conflict for whatever economic goals that they have. This to me is my favorite thing about music, is just being around people and working together and creating those kind of emotional, cultural, satisfying bonds. When you think about even the history of Europe, right, which was not that long ago, where people were shooting each other. You know, people were climbing through the hills and the trees and trying to kill one another. And now we have, you know, people sitting in bands playing music together. This is a sign of human progress. You know, that people realize what we're really capable of as human beings is working together and enjoying what the world has to offer, rather than this pointless, you know, conflicts, which is usually not created by people. It's usually created by people who want something for themselves. It's just, so that I would say that's what I love the most about music, is just being in different places with lots of different people and creating those bonds. It's wonderful. It never gets old.
Okay, then I thank you very much for this talk.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And wish you all the best with everything that will come to you.
And likewise. It's great. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Germany. You know, Germany is one of those countries that gets it. When it comes to music, they you know, Germans understand. You know, there are other places like that too, but Germany is kind of special because they also put money into it. It's like they really care about music, and it's marvelous. You know, the attention that goes into the arts. Some places they put that into, you know, different things, you know, painting or stuff. But in Germany, music, people really understand music as a birthright. Even, you know, what they put into jazz, which you could say is not. And it's funny because a lot of people don't realize in Germany how many really great bands there were. German bands like Herbelsheimer and so many, you know, really great bands.